tonight with you and with my co-host, Medea Benjamin, co-founder of CODEPINK, Jodie Evans, co-founder of CODEPINK, Teddy Ogborn. He is the coordinator of our War is Not Green campaign. And we also have Brian Garvey, who's co-hosting with us from Massachusetts Peace Action. So we are kicking off Earth Day a little bit early, and we're so glad that you could join us as we look at the intersection of climate and militarism. Our guests, fabulous lineup, include Julian Ogborn. He is founder of Ocean Blue Law. He's a writer, a poet, a lyricist, amazing guy. We'll hear from him later. We'll also hear from Stephen Donziger, who has been battling it out with Chevron and speaking for all of us as we challenge the intersection of wars for oil and colonization and militarization and how that impacts the greenhouse gas emissions and the climate crisis. And we'll also be hearing from Keone DeFranco, who's a sovereignty activist, water protector in Hawaii. We'll talk about all of that and Ukraine, China, I mean, a lot, right? But we can do it. So let's start with a few updates. Medea, I'm going to go to you first. What's happening?
Yes, well, hello to everybody. And remember, you can introduce yourselves in the chat. I want to give an update on the leaked Pentagon documents that came out last week. And there's about 300 documents that have been put online in the form of photos. They mostly came from February and March. I'm just going to talk about the ones that relate to Ukraine and give you some brief updates. One is that it talks about the stalemate on the ground, the deficiencies in the Russian forces. Of course, they've been unable to even take the bombed out city of Bakhmut after months and months of fighting. But it also predicts that the spring offensive that's supposed to happen from the Ukrainian side looks like there are already deficiencies in equipment and troops. And they say the most likely outcome will be modest territorial gain. There's a document that says the war is locked in a grinding campaign of attrition and was likely heading towards a stalemate. Another aspect is all the spying that the U.S. is doing. And of course, this happens on a regular basis, but the U.S. gets very embarrassed when this information gets leaked. And it shows that they are spying on our allies, including Zelensky himself, spying on the UN Secretary General, spying on our allies in South Korea as they try to get around their own laws that prohibit them from sending weapons to a conflict area, i.e. Ukraine, by sending them to Poland first. And then lastly, I wanted to mention that the documents talk about special forces from NATO countries that the NATO countries had not admitted they're there. That includes about 50 special forces from the UK, a handful of special forces from the US, France, and other countries. And one of the Republican Congress people, Matt Gaetz, is introducing what's called a privileged resolution of inquiry that will force Biden to notify Congress exactly the number of US military that are in Ukraine. So that's some of the updates on the leaked documents.
Thank you for that, Medea. Brian Garvey is with us from Massachusetts Peace Action. Brian, what's happening?
Well, I'd like to give a brief update on this new campaign, and it's directly related to what Medea was just talking about, calling for a negotiated end to this war, calling for negotiations, for more diplomacy, and for a ceasefire. If what we're looking at is a war of attrition, a stalemate, those go on for years and years. So the best way to end it is at the negotiating table. And to do so, the Peace in Ukraine Coalition has struck upon a very interesting idea, and that is to just put this on the front page by buying a big ad in a newspaper, posting a letter to Presidents Biden, Putin, and Zelensky, calling for a negotiated end to this war. Because I think there's a lot of people in this country who are thinking about this, but there's so much media propaganda in support to continuing this war that by seeing it on a full-page ad in a major newspaper, could really wake the people up that, other people might be thinking like you, that it's time really to end this war. So far, I think there's about 5,000 signatures on this. I believe it's about 50
Something in
groups
that
that have
neighborhood.
endorsed it.
Yeah.
And if someone could put the link in the chat, I think where this gets placed, how close to the front page and on how big a newspaper is going to depend on how many donations we get for the campaign. So
That's right.
if you have a few bucks, please throw them Code Pink's way. I think
Yeah,
this is a great
absolutely.
initiative.
Yeah, this is an initiative. Thank you, Brian. That as Brian mentioned, the Peace in Ukraine Coalition launched. We hope to get this petition, and Maha will. Oh, there we go. It's posted right there in the chat. Thank you, Maha. We hope to get this petition published in an ad, which would cost about $10,000 for a newspaper that's widely read on Capitol Hill. We've so far raised about $7,500. So help us, reach the finish line, please. In terms of my news updates, so just a few headlines. We have 200 troops, military trainers in Taiwan right now. We had a bipartisan congressional delegation led by Congressman Ro Khanna go to Taiwan. The U.S., of course, has a lot of sanctions on China, so lawmakers are often looking to drum up business with Taiwan and its semiconductor sector, but at great risk, we know. What else? Brazil's Lula is saying that the United States should knock off encouraging Ukraine to continue this war. We need to end it, not fan the flames with more weapons. Ukraine has rejected Iraq's offer to mediate a peace agreement. Meanwhile, Russia is installing short-range nuclear weapons in Belarus. So please, this is an urgent call to sign that petition and help us reach the finish line with the ad. Now it is my great pleasure to turn this over to Jodie Evans and Teddy Ogborn, who are campaigning for CODEPINK's War is Not Green campaign. This is a very important time, Earth Day coming up, and we know that the environmental movement and the peace movement it's imperative that they merge, right? That we become one and amplify the voices for peace. So with that, Jodie Evans, co-founder of CODEPINK, take it away.
Thanks, Marcy. Thanks, Medea. And thanks, Maha, for supporting us. And Brian, nice to be on CODEPINK Congress. So, did you know that the United States spends 28 times more on the military than on affecting climate change? Or that war is the single largest institutional consumer of oil? And that the Defense Department comprises 80% of US government fuel consumption? And that, of course, we know oil is one of the leading causes of interstate wars. So War is Not Green has been a call from CODEPINK since we started for almost 20 years. We've been out there with this message. But now we have the numbers, we have the research, and we have a global movement with us. 8 years ago, when we launched our Divest from Weapons campaign, it was on the heels of the success of the climate movement's divest work. Well, if people were divesting from oil companies and those companies that were polluting the planet, they needed to divest from weapons too, because if you don't end war, it doesn't matter what else you do. The numbers that come out of war are the ones that will take us over the brink. And the poster child of this divest campaign, we made it BlackRock's Mr. Fink, because he was out there bragging, I'm the champion for the planet, I'm doing everything good for the planet, but he heavily invested in weapons companies. So we took him on. And now Teddy has a CODEPINK resolution as part of the next BlackRock shareholder meeting that calls out his lies and that deception. We also took this message with Nancy Mancias, our longtime wing campaigner, to COP in Glasgow. And what was shocking is as we marched through the streets with 100,000 other activists for the planet, they were shocked to learn the cost of the war to the planet. And they were furious that they were just learning about it, that it had purposely been hidden. We know about the manipulation of information for more war. So hiding the cost of war to the planet has been part of that. And we have a lot more facts and talking points at codepink.org/wing that Maha will post in the chat here. So there are lots of ways you can be educated on Earth Day to carry that message. But to tell you more is Teddy Ogborn. He's our War is Not Green coordinator, an amazing climate activist organizer based in New York City. He's out there getting arrested and supporting across the board those that are engaged, taking on banks and taking on the bad actors for the planet. He's also multifaceted as film festival director, a fencing coach, a film producer, and a high school English teacher. So he's comes with a lot of skill sets, but the best is he's a great activist for the planet. Take it away, Teddy.
Thank you so much, Jodie and Marcy Medea for setting up this call. I'm so excited to see everybody here in preparation for Earth Day. As a climate activist and as our War is Not Green campaigner, I'm really excited for all of the events that we have this week. Of course, day of Saturday, the 22nd, Earth Day, and that week following. It's a very busy week for climate activists the world over, and we need to be a part of that. So as people of conscience committed to peace, we need to be there on Earth Day calling for peace for the sake of the planet. I'll get a little bit more into that somewhat later in the call, what we have going on Earth Day. I hope everyone here finds ways to engage through that. I'll put my email just right now in the chat, actually, in case folks have any questions about how to engage. But I wanted to talk first, of course, about the war in Ukraine and the environmental costs of that war. If the humanitarian crisis caused by this war, the human costs weren't enough, we are calling for environmentalists the world over, people who depend on our climate, which is everybody, to call for peace in Ukraine. This concerns, of course, people at the site of the conflict, but it concerns everybody on this planet. Everything that you hear about within the climate movement, about environmental justice, about how climate change and rising sea levels disproportionately affect people of color and vulnerable communities the world over. That is all true, and exponentially so, of this war in Ukraine. Another figure that I'd like to share is it's as the war itself, simply the operations of the war. It's as though an entirely new mid-sized European country has sprouted out of the ground and began spewing carbon and methane emissions into the air. A mid-sized European country. That is simply the emissions caused by this war. It must stop. Again, if not for the humanitarian tragedies and deaths incurred on both sides of the conflict, but of course the environmental ones. Naturally, you can assume this one of those major factors is the air pollution caused by rockets being launched and explosions on the ground, toxic chemicals being spewed in urban and rural areas, harming folks in both territorial Ukraine and Russia, and traveling up into our atmosphere. These things don't break down. They're forever chemicals, often in our atmosphere, causing acid rain throughout the planet. Of course, Ukraine itself holds a third of the biodiversity of all of Europe. And we know that this planet will not survive without the abundant life and biodiversity that we all depend on. And that both forest cover and farmland is being decimated by wayward bombs or very targeted bombs and warfare. Farmland specifically, many square kilometers of farmland will be unarable for years to come, potentially decades. It's as though it's being salted intentionally, and crops will not be able to be grown. This is people's livelihoods that we're talking about. And in terms of the ocean biodiversity, it's been estimated that about 50,000 Black Sea dolphins, 50,000 have washed up on the shores around the Black Sea as a result of maritime operations of the war in Ukraine and poisoning of their waters, and also disorientation due to maritime operations, which disrupts their echolocation. But as a climate activist, I also think a lot about the fossil fuel industry, of course. And it goes without saying, we've all experienced this. The fossil fuel industry has mutated as a ginormous monster because of this war in Ukraine. I mean, we've all experienced this in the last year. We were all paying record prices for our own fuel, right? As consumers, we are experiencing those price hikes. And we were all told that this is simply due to the war in Ukraine. And this was the big oil's way of sweeping the issue under the rug and avoiding accountability. But it's a Google search away. 2022 was the most profitable year on record for Chevron, BP, Shell, all of the oil giants. So it's not as though they were taking a hit. They were price gouging. They were able to do so because of the war and because of these mutated fossil fuel markets. And lest we think that a hand has been smoothed over the sandbox of control of energy over the world. This is the United States specifically profiting from this mutated fossil fuel markets. You see, actually, when the Nord Stream pipelines were sabotaged last September, this was approximately precisely the moment when the United States natural gas exports to Europe for the first time ever overtook Russian sales to Europe. So you can see these are geopolitical and corporate games being played by global superpowers because the fossil fuel industry does control geopolitics in this way. Just as Jodie mentioned, it is one of the leading causes of interstate conflict. And we know that the war in Ukraine is no exception. So that is why we need everybody in the peace movement and in the climate movement to be opposing this war in Ukraine because of the deaths on the side of the conflict and the many more deaths that will result of climate catastrophe and already are. So thank you. Yes, Marcy sharing this link. We have written a letter to President Biden and to Congress calling for a ceasefire and negotiations in Ukraine immediately on environmental grounds. We have many, many individual signers, people of conscience who have signed on already calling for negotiations now. And we also have many major environmental organizations signed on, such as 350.org North America, Veterans for Peace is signed on, Extinction Rebellion chapters across the country are signed on. And we need everybody here to continue to spread this message. We're going to deliver it to Congress next week, just following Earth Day. When the message is the loudest, we're going to catch this wave, and we're going to call for negotiations and ceasefire in Ukraine. So terrific. I hope we can all join in that effort. And I'll talk more about Earth Day in just a little bit, but thank you everyone so much.
Thank you,
I'll pass
Teddy.
it right along.
Wonderful to have you, in the vanguard of this campaign. We are now going to turn to our invited guests tonight. We have, as I mentioned, Keone DeFranco from Hawaii. We have Juan Agon from Guam, and we have Stephen Donziger from New York, who has been battling it out with Chevron for quite some time. He will update us on all of that and the intersection of climate and militarism. But first, I'm going to turn it back to Teddy to introduce our first guest. So Teddy, if you want to introduce Keone.
Yes, okay. I'm so happy to have Keone on. Keone DeFranco is a community organizer, a Kiaiwai water protector, and a Kanaka Maoli native Hawaiian resident of Waimanalo, Oahu. Keone was part of a delegation of Kiaiwai water protectors who traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with Hawaii's representatives to discuss accelerating the defueling and decommissioning of the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility. In 2021, the Navy's facility began leaking fuel into the freshwater aquifer underneath the island of Oahu, contaminating the water for an estimated 100,000 residents. And Keone has been key in this fight. Keone, thank you so much for joining us. Take it away.
Aloha mai, o ko'uinoa Keone, o Waimanalo maiao. Aloha, and thank you all so much for being here today. My name is Keone, and I'm based in Waimanalo on the island of Oahu. I'm a Kanaka Maoli native Hawaiian and a Kiaiwai, a water protector and community organizer in the efforts to defuel, decommission, and deoccupy Red Hill, which is a naval fuel storage facility built in the 1940s that has been leaking fuel directly into our water supply since its doors opened. As mentioned, most recently, Red Hill leaked over 14,000 gallons of jet fuel in May and June of November of 2021 and experienced an AFFF spill of firefighting suppression liquid, which contains a forever chemical PFAS in November of 2022. Now that's 3 toxic spills within a year and a half. Needless to say, the Red Hill fuel facility is a threat to all life on Oahu, as it continues to store over 100 million gallons of fuel 100 feet above Oahu's sole source aquifer, which supports a population of 900,000. Another leak could completely destroy the water pipes, making Honolulu uninhabitable. We ask the question, once that occurs, where will our people go when the Navy then finally evacuates its people? We refuse to allow this risk to continue. And while a task force has been created to defuel Red Hill, not a single gallon of fuel has left the facility to date. Congress now requires the Secretary of Defense to certify that the Red Hill facility is non-essential before it can be defueled via the National Defense Authorization Act of 2023, a certification that has yet to happen. And so this happens 12 months after the Secretary of Defense did deem this site as one that can be defueled. Now we're moving backwards, most likely given the increased activity within the Pacific region as we gear up in an offensive towards China. Every moment Red Hill is not defueled, we risk irreversible damage to our aquifer, which our grandchildren will have to deal with. The U.S. military is the greatest threat to life in Hawaii and on our island of Oahu. Late-stage imperialism is when jet fuel is coming out of your water faucet. The logical next step is for the immediate reduction in the footprint of the Department of Defense in Hawaii. If the military currently occupies 25% of Oahu's land, then we call for an immediate reduction of troops. If we, the people, have been asked to reduce our water usage by 10%, we call for 10% of the military troops to leave our shores immediately, as we are still experiencing a water shortage directly as a result of the Navy's negligence. Now, Red Hill is not an isolated incident, so we also call for land back, for the illegally occupied and stolen military and civilian lands to return to the Kanaka Maoli, the people, not the state of Hawaii, as reparations for decades of pollution to our land and water sources so that we can begin to heal as a people, as Lahui. The Kanaka Maoli Native Hawaiians make up only 20% of Hawaii's population at this point, while making up 50% of its homeless. The presence of the military directly displaces the Kanaka and places us in poverty. We call to shut down bases across Pai'aina, Hawaii, including Makua Valley on Oahu, Ohakuloa Training Area on Hawaii Island, Pacific Military Range Facility Barking Sands on Kauai, and Maui Space Surveillance Complex, which leaked diesel fuel on the summit of Haleakala this past February. Now, all of these sites have leases that expire starting in 2029. So this is a kahea call to action in a moment in which we can actually permanently shut these sites down for good. Each one of them is going to be going through a process of an environmental impact statement. The first of these has happened for Pohakuloa. The state of Hawaii has already rejected their first draft, which means that there are opportunities for each one of these sites to actually be shut down for good. We also call for civilian oversight on the Joint Task Force Red Hill, which we believe is a very simple ask. It took hours before our chief engineer of Honolulu Board of Water Supply, Ernie Lau, to be alerted that there was a PFAS spill last November. And we, the public, have still not seen film footage of this spill, which has been withheld for us. And so this is also a call that the Navy must release this footage for transparency's sake and place community and civilian leaders such as Ernie Lau onto the Joint Task Force. It makes no sense that we do not have a seat at the table. To restore our water systems, we must regain management of our lands. Aloha aina, aina aloha. We love the land is us. We are the land. The bones of our ancestors are iwi, turned to dust. Thus, we become the land that we protect. We are genealogically connected. Ola ikawai, water is life. Ola kawai, there is life in the water itself. And so without the necessity of the water itself supporting life for Kanaka, given our genealogical connection, it is our kuleana responsibility to fight in protection of fresh water to exist within itself. Mahalo nui loa for your time. Aloha mai.
Oh, Keone, that was really beautiful. And I feel like crying. Please post in the chat what you would like people to do. That's highest priority. And then do email us and we can tell people in greater depth what they can do to support your efforts. Okay, I think
There's
yeah.
time.
Well, we're going to go to questions in a minute, but first we're going to hear from some of our other guests. We will have a Q&A after we hear from Julian Ogborn and Stephen
Can I ask
Donziger.
one question, Marcy? Just
Oh, okay, one question, because we do want to do the Q&A.
I know, but also to express, wow, just deepest love and the violations that are happening, and you know, here we are talking about Earth Day and the effects of the military. And I'm just, you know, we watch the culture of militarism find its way into everything. What are your experiences with the militarism as you work to defend, as you're a planet defender? What engagements do you have with militarism?
It's interesting because I say militarism. We also look at this as military tourism. So we look at like Bellows Air Force Base, which is the closest military base to where I live in Waimanalo. This is a sizable military base that at this point is marketed online as mainly a rest and recreational site. And so this is, you know, hundreds and hundreds of acres of pristine beachfront property that is withheld from our community, many of which live on tents on the beach just 2 minutes down, where the military not just has, you know, training facilities, but withholds housing that could house our people. And so we have, you know, Pohakuloa, which is the largest military training facility within the US on Hawaii Island. That is a site that 30 days before the Mauna Loa eruption, which happened last November, the military, the Army in particular, was hosting training right at the base of Mauna Loa, dropping bombs. And so as our community is saying, this mountain looks like it is about to erupt, do not do so, they do that, and then, you know, 30 days later, an eruption occurs. And so we do have, you know, this 20% of the state of Hawaii itself is military occupation. 25% of Oahu just in itself is also military occupation. But then when you begin to look at, you know, which of these lands are just unused and used for military tourism, you know, Barking Sands on Kauai is definitely one of those. Bellows Beach is another one of those. And so for us, demilitarization is a phased process. Of course, we would like the entire US presence to leave our shores immediately. But for us, if we can ask for 10% here, 10% there reduction, give us this land, give us that land, so that our people that are unhoused and homeless can move into a space that hasn't been polluted and have a roof over their head, because some of these places like Bellows is also archaeological sites where our burials are, and places where we can immediately begin to house our people and grow our food. Food security is directly in conflict with military occupation as well. And so if we can focus on returning land for food and housing, that makes a big difference. And so for us, this is a phased process. And again, you know, reparations for us as community means return land to us immediately. If you cannot speed up the defueling of Red Hill, then give us land. You know, tell us why not.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keone. All right, we're going to turn to somebody that a lot of us have heard of, Stephen Donziger. He's been in the news quite a bit for the last few years. People have been outside his home in New York City in support of his case. And Stephen is best known for his legal battles with Chevron, in which he represented over 30,000 farmers and indigenous people in Ecuador who suffered environmental damage and health problems, understatement, caused by oil drilling. The Ecuadorian court awarded the plaintiffs $9.5 billion in damages, which led Chevron to withdraw its assets from Ecuador and launch legal action against Donziger in the United States. Having spent 45 days in prison and a combined total of 993 days under house arrest, Stephen Donziger was released on April 25th, 2022. He believes what happened to him is basically a lab experiment in disguise. He'll talk more about that and the goal of the environmental movement, how we can merge with the peace movement. All right, Stephen, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you so much for that nice introduction to Jodie Evans and Teddy and everyone on the call. Everyone does such extraordinary work. I'm honored to be invited to share a little bit of my story and sort of what it means. So, you know, in a nutshell, I've worked for many years representing indigenous peoples and farmer communities in Ecuador's Amazon against Chevron. Chevron, through its predecessor company, Texaco, went into the Amazon of Ecuador in the late 60s, and over about a 25-year period deliberately dumped billions of gallons of cancer-causing oil waste into the forest, into rivers, streams that local communities relied on for their drinking water, for their bathing, for their fishing. The result over time is many people have suffered tremendously. Many have died of cancer and other oil-related diseases. And this humanitarian catastrophe persists to this day. People are really hurting in Ecuador. We filed a lawsuit, won a roughly $10 billion judgment in 2013. Rather than pay the judgment, Chevron then went after me personally in the United States, in New York, where I live. They sued me for the most money anyone in this country, any individual in this country has ever been sued for, $60 billion. We kept going. We won a big judgment in Canada from the Supreme Court in Canada to enforce the Ecuador environmental judgment against Chevron's assets in that country. And then Chevron went after me through a judge here in New York who had investments in Chevron. And this judge charged me with criminal contempt of court for refusing to turn over my computer and confidential case file to Chevron in the middle of this civil litigation. I had appealed his order, which I think is unprecedented and illegal. And while it was on appeal, he had me locked up prior to trial on his contempt charges. And I ended up staying in my home for almost 3 years, including 45 days of that time I was in a federal prison. And this was all for a misdemeanor charge of contempt, where the maximum sentence was 180 days. More notable, and this is sort of the larger message, is this is, I think, part of a new fossil fuel industry playbook to target activists. The federal prosecutor in New York refused to prosecute me on the judge's contempt charges. So the judge appointed a private Chevron law firm to prosecute me in the name of the United States government. I'm the only person in the history of our country, I think, who has been prosecuted directly by a corporation and detained by a corporation, which essentially took over the prosecutorial machinery of the United States government to try to silence me. So next Tuesday, actually a week from today, is the year anniversary of my release from this period of detention. I'll point out, I still sort of live in the danger of them doing this all over again, because the issue of my computer is unresolved. Chevron has convinced the judge to confiscate my passport. I've lost my right to travel, and they also disbarred me on the basis of all this without a hearing. Just so you know, the Ecuador case is still very much alive. It's been affirmed on appeal by Ecuador's highest court, the National Court of Justice. The communities in Ecuador who really are the center of this battle are attempting to enforce their judgment against Chevron's assets in other countries. So that's sort of the story. Now, what are really the lessons, I think, for all of us? First of all, I think what happened to me is sort of part of a broader trend in our country of corporatization of power, corporate control of government to try to essentially increase already obscenely high profits even further and prevent a transition to clean energy and continue the way. It was a little too successful in their advocacy. They want to have the ability to threaten them with prison. And if the prosecutorial or the prosecutors don't go along, to prosecute them directly. My case actually got all the way to the US Supreme Court. And just a couple of weeks ago, I appealed this conviction. I ended up being tried in a non-jury trial by a judge who's a Federalist Society leader. Chevron funds the Federalist Society. The trial, in my opinion, was a farce. She wouldn't let me testify in my own defense. She wouldn't let me explain why I appealed this order that I turn over my computer. In any event, it got to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court listed and relisted my case 5 times in their conference where they determine what cases to take. And they eventually denied my appeal, essentially legalizing the idea of corporate prosecutions in the United States. But interestingly, two of the justices, the conservative justices, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, dissent, really a beautiful opinion. By the way, I don't agree with Gorsuch and Kavanaugh on probably 99.9% of the issues they rule on. But this was amazing, and they basically stood for the principle that corporate prosecutions should not happen. They violate the Constitution and they violate international law. I'm shocked, frankly, that none of the so-called liberals on the court joined them. It only takes 4 justices of the 9 to take an appeal. So I just needed 2 more, and I couldn't get it. But I'm really proud of, that we were able to take it as far as we did. And I think it really sends a message when these 2 conservative justices sort of see this for what it is. It's a step forward to some degree, but the sad reality is this playbook is now legal. Now, I don't necessarily expect it to be used. I hope it's never used again, but I think we as activists need to understand that we need to see this for what it is and fight it so it never happens again. So with regard to the question of sort of the connection between the peace movement and the climate justice movement, I mean, one thing I've noticed in this journey I've been on, where I've had to really grow a lot and learn a lot to understand what was really happening to me. It's not necessarily immediately obvious when you're charged with a crime or the judge appoints a prosecutor under a technical rule of the federal rules of criminal procedure, what's really happening. Because a lot of these tools of judicial oppression are hidden in the esoterica of the technical law. But, I've been able to speak to enough people and get enough coverage from the independent media where I think people are generally aware of this. I do think it's critical that we connect dots, connect movements. It's not just the peace movement and the climate justice movement that need to be closer together. It's also the labor movement, the criminal justice movement. It's really every progressive movement, isn't it? And I think that the climate movement as a whole has not been connected enough to some of these other issues that are affecting communities around our country and around the world. And, one thing I've tried to do in my talks and in my advocacy is connect the dots so we can forge a stronger movement for justice that brings people together. I mean, think about this. There's so much crazy happening in our country right now. I mean, just in the last 2 weeks, you have the whole, abortion issue resurfacing with the pill issue. You have, it seems like there's a mass shooting every week. We have reports of a man literally dying after he's eaten up by insects in a jail in Atlanta. We have 42 activists in Atlanta charged with domestic terrorism. They're mostly peaceful protesters and a complete abuse of the law. We have poisonings in Ohio, Indiana. This is all, in my opinion, not just disparate, crazy events. I mean, this is all a function of a deeper problem in our country that relates to the utter buyout of government. The government's supposed to protect the public. It's been bought out by corporate power, and it's manifesting now in huge problems all over the place. And of course, it gets everyone so upset and confused. It's almost to the point where it's by design, so people feel paralyzed. So we cannot organize and we cannot bring the peace movement together with the climate movement and the labor movement and the criminal justice reform movement. So I think it's really important we keep our heads straight as we're, really buffeted with all sorts of stuff going on right now. And, the bigger picture, though, for me and for those who get attacked by corporations, I mean, Greenpeace has been sued under RICO for engaging in a campaign in Canada to protect an old growth forest. There are massive abuses of the law taking place. Our federal judiciary, a good part of it has gone so far to the right that these cases start to gain traction and they become, weapons of power by corporations to use the judicial system to undermine people's movements. And, I'm kind of an extreme manifestation of that. And I'm lucky enough to have had enough solidarity, including from Code Pink. And by the way, there's a person who I think once worked for Code Pink, Allie McCracken, who now works for Amnesty International, who literally saved my ass like you cannot believe. She fought behind the scenes for my rights and got me out of prison after 6 weeks when I was supposed to be there for 6 months. So all of what each of you do, Teddy, hearing you, it's inspirational. And Kiani, you guys are such an inspiration out there in Hawaii, man. I salute you so much and feel total solidarity with your struggle. But all of these little things all of us are doing need to connect up, and they really, really matter. And the connections really matter. So I'll stop there. I hope that's at least marginally relevant to what you wanted to hear me say tonight. And I'm happy to answer any questions later on.
Marcy, you're muted.
Okay, here we go. Thank you, Stephen. We really appreciate your battle, what you've been through, and how you have inspired others to fight back. We are now going to go to our next guest from Guam, and Jodie will introduce him.
Thank you. And thank you, Stephen, for sharing your story and being so courageous. So it's, you remind us that to stay in the fight together. So next I want to bring to you my dear friend, Julian Ogborn, who's a Chamorro human rights lawyer and author from Guam. His most recent book, No Country for 8-Spot Butterflies, you must all read because it illustrates the urgency of fighting global climate injustice, and his clarity of focus and radical empathy are desperately necessary for this new world we're imagining. Julian founded the law firm Blue Ocean Law at the age of 28, and he earned a Pulitzer Prize recognition for his 2021 essay right before COP in Glasgow, which was in the Atlantic, and it was called To Hell with Drowning. He serves on the Global Advisory Council of Progressive International, and he works at the intersection of environmental justice and indigenous rights. He's worked to prevent ocean mining, illuminate struggles of indigenous leader communities, expose threats to human rights, and most recently, an enormous win for the planet that he'll share with you. He's one of my heroes. Please welcome Julian.
Thank you so much, Jodie, and thank you so much to everyone at CODEPINK for inviting me to be part of this session today. Jodie asked that I just briefly recount what happened in New York last month, and so I'll just start there, and then I'll share with you all what's happening in my own homeland of Guam. So on March 29th, a small miracle happened. My law firm, Blue Ocean Law, we have represented the Republic of Vanuatu for the past 3 years, and we have been pursuing an advisory opinion on climate change and human rights from the International Court of Justice based in The Hague. This is the principal judicial organ of the UN, the World Court, some say, and we really wanted finally to, confirm what the youth around the world have long known and have long sort of rallied around, the cry that the climate crisis is in fact also a human rights crisis. And so we've been working for 3 years, and last month we succeeded in securing a resolution that was adopted by consensus, which in and of itself is pretty shocking, only because in the entire history of the United Nations, the General Assembly has never requested an advisory opinion from the World Court on that basis, on a consensus basis, meaning we got even the naysaying states to sort of get out of the way and not actually oppose this resolution. So we are now gearing up for sort of a worldwide set of pleadings, especially by climate vulnerable countries around the world, for whom the climate crisis is really just happening here and now and just devastating. There's such a wide range of adverse impacts being felt across the small island Pacific developing states. So we are working on that. That's one of the biggest projects that the firm is working on. But I also want to just share a little bit an update, because I've spoken with CODEPINK before, and CODEPINK has been a wonderful ally for the indigenous Chamorro people of Guam. But the bullet train is still on the tracks and just heading toward us. The U.S., as it ramps up its potential war against China is really aggressively militarizing my homeland of Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands. We, as I've told Jodie, we are bracing ourselves for a cataclysmic round of militarization with no parallel in modern history. I mean, just the other month, the U.S. Marine Corps had a ribbon cutting ceremony and sort of to celebrate its brand new Marine Corps base. It's the first U.S. Marine Corps base that has been built anywhere in this country in 70 years. So like the U.S. is just dragging us backward. I mean, the U.S. is our colonizer. Guam remains formally slated by the UN as a non-self-governing territory, which is the UN's way of saying modern day colony. That means that the colonized people of Guam are officially waiting to exercise our right of self-determination. And that includes the right to outright independence, for example. It includes the possibility of throwing off the colonial yoke for good. And so this is what, in the context of that, we have a sort of rapid and really large-scale militarization of the island. Right now, the number is 5,000. So the US and government, together with the government of Japan, has agreed to transfer 5,000 US Marines from Okinawa, which itself shoulders a disproportionate burden of US military presence. I think Okinawa plays host to roughly 70% of the entire US military presence in Japan is housed in Okinawa. So in part due to growing unrest by civil society, community-based organizations, etc., the US government and Japan have agreed to relocate at least 5,000 of those US Marines to Guam. So what that means is a brand new Marine Corps base, dramatic expansion of US military footprint on Guam. This has translated into several things being constructed, several military related construction projects. For example, a 5-range military, like live fire training range complex that's up there on the northern coast of the island. And to build this complex, which includes a massive machine gun range, the US military has destroyed over 1,000 acres of pristine limestone forests, the same forests that serve as critical habitat for several endangered endemic species, like our native 8-spot butterfly, which I write about in the book, but also serves as like the grounds, where our traditional plant medicine grows, and our traditional medicine women, our zoamti, or our traditional healers, gather the plants they need to make certain medicines. So we have been obviously opposed to this massive militarization of our homelands. Oh, let me back up and say, it's not just terrestrial expansion, it's also marine expansion. So the US military is also carving out a swath of the Pacific Sea, of the Pacific Ocean, that's basic. The last estimate was, according to the last number, it's almost the size of India. That is how big a swath of the ocean off the coast of Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands that the US military is playing war games on. It's blowing up ships. It's endangering a whole wide range of our other than human relatives, from humpback whales. And there's a humpback whale nursery right off of the coast of Saipan. There are sort of a wide range of dolphins, sea turtles, and other species that are directly in the line of fire. And we have US federal agencies sort of essentially waiving the requirements of having to comply with US federal environmental statutes. So the military, in effect, has a license to kill. And that, it has at least a license to take. And to take is to harm or otherwise disturb marine mammals and the like, in their natural habitat. So we are looking at tens of thousands of marine species a year, tens of thousands that have been authorized to be taken. You should read, if you want further reading, you should read the letter of authorization that's been issued, the incidental take permit that's been issued. This is like essentially a grant, a 7-year license to harm all of this marine life. And that's what we're up against. To be in Guam right now is to sort of be assailed at every side, by the US military because of colonial enterprise. And we are here and we are objecting, we have protested, there's been direct action, there's been lawsuits. We have done so many things to try to stop the spreading canopy of US militarization. And, in some ways, and that I think is an indicia of a larger failing. I think the entire national anti-war movement has failed. People still don't understand what Guam is, that it is the ancestral homeland for the Chamorro people. Instead, we have language, the constant use and deployment of language that disappears my people. For example, Guam being referred to as an unsinkable aircraft carrier. There's all this innocuous genocidal use of language. And it all sort of runs toward the same end. And that is to sort of render the people invisible, my people, and sort of like render this place open for the taking by the US military. And the US military is taking. And we are all in danger for it. So yes, we work on this issue. We have tried to do a number of things. It's very hard to litigate certain kinds of issues in the US federal court system, as Stephen and everyone else here probably already well knows. There are a variety of sort of jurisprudential tools that function as escape valves for judges to essentially get out and sort of like just excuse all kinds of sort of absolutely abhorrent behavior that is so concretely adverse to so many forms of life, human and otherwise. And those tools have been employed in our case. Earth Justice, everyone has lost their round of litigation. All litigation has sort of failed to stop this. And we clearly just need people power. We need that. And we have so much more work to do. The last thing I'll say is the work of solidarity is just so critical. It's clearly the only way forward. That's why I'm excited to be a part of Progressive International, to take these stands with different communities. For example, when Red Hill was being contaminated in Hawaii, affecting our Native Hawaiian brothers and sisters and everyone there, it is horrendous what the US military has been allowed to get away with in Hawaii too. They have poisoned the water too. In Guam, our aquifer is in direct is being directly threatened by that same machine gun range I just described, at which the US military plans to expend some 6.7 million lead bullets over our primary source of drinking water. So all of these, struggles are not only connected, but we have to build bridges across those struggles, because clearly it's the only way forward is a road that's paved with solidarity. And I mean that for Okinawa too. It's a lie when they say that they're reducing the US military presence by moving some of these Marines to Guam, because in fact, the US Marines has also recently announced that they're still expanding their US military footprint in Okinawa. So our fates are tied, our future is. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Juliana Guan. We are going to go now to our Q&A because we have a lot of questions, and we encourage people to post their questions in the chat. After we conduct our Q&A, we'll take an action, and then we will hear more about Earth Day and Code Pink's plans from Teddy Ogborn. But for now, if we could put our three guests in the spotlight, Keone and Stephen and Julian, we can go ahead and ask some questions. So Jodie, first question.
Well, first of all, just super gratitude, because everyone has shared some very hard stories for all of us witnessing to hold for you. So just the deepest gratitude, and thank you for sharing about what this work is like up close and personal. And I posted in the chat, we have a campaign at CODEPINK. So I put in the chat how you can call on your members of Congress to take on the issue of what's happening in Guam. But Julian, what else, if there's anything else that those here who've been affected by your story can do besides read your book, which I also encourage everyone to do, because it nourishes your heart as you deal with the grief simultaneously. So Julian, anything else?
Thank you so much, Jodie, but also just rationing up the organizing. We really have to target this Armed Services Committee, the Armed Forces Committee. There's so much work that is like sort of missed opportunities, and that is like organizing the hell out of ourselves to really stop, because let's call it what it is, it's the military industrial congressional complex. Congress is a bedfellow in this whole sordid mess. And we know that because they are literally approve and then add money to the Pentagon's requested budget. It is a shit show. What's happened, how clearly and rapidly they're accelerating the militarization of my homeland, and also just to call all of these leaders on the carpet when they sort of reflexively use the language of going to war with China. None of that is inevitable. And but we see its use. It's so loose and so casual. Like I cringe when I hear it because so many people are already sort of sliding into the war going rhetoric without sort of like just taking a pause. There's so much like work. We can get that petition signed. We can like work on certain committee members. I mean, there's just really a wide range of things we could do. Another thing I would ask, I don't want to take up too much time, but if Guam can be explicitly added to the sort of the list of demands that CODEPINK is already bringing, so that we're not duplicating our efforts. Guam is just absent from some of the work you're already doing. So I think that's another thing.
Thank you. Medea, you had a great question.
Yes, I was talking in the chat to Keone, and it really also applies to Julian. This issue, Keone, of your being able to work in alliance with some of the members of the military who live on the base and whose water has been contaminated. I wonder if you could tell us how that alliance is working with all the differences there must be in culture, in the Native Hawaiians thinking of the military as invaders of their land, and potentially to Julian, is there any potential of working? Are there any allies that you can find in the military for the issue of the militarization of Guam? Thank you.
Yeah, mahalo for the question. First and foremost, it's important to establish that Red Hill has been leaking for decades. The site was declassified in 1999, so we didn't even know it existed, yet it continued to spill from the 1940s on. There was a massive spill in 2014 that was even larger than 2019, so I think we have the advantage of social media and word spreading faster than ever before to our advantage. And this is one of those rare instances in which our movement, as Kiat Yubai, as water protectors, this fight is directly linked to sovereignty. This is directly linked to self-governance, self-determination, and AI independence. As we are removed from our land, thus our land is poisoned. And so this has been one of these very unique moments in history in which active military members and their families are on the same side as us. And places like Fort Island have been poisoned again for decades, and people that have been stationed there have been sick for a very long time and haven't had the, maybe the confidence to come forward and speak. I do want to shout out Major Mandy Fedit, who has courageously, while in uniform, not just spoken out about this, but actually directly sued the Navy along with a number of others. And so she's done that, putting her career at risk. And through struggle, we have created incredible solidarity. We've been able to have these conversations about, this might be new to your community, but this is what we've been experiencing for 130 years of illegal occupation. And so if we can create this is a working class solidarity movement, putting the Hawaiians back onto land will directly reduce the cost of living for everyone in Hawaii if you just look at agriculture. And so being able to have these talking points spread outside of our community is one of those small wins we have, because now people can understand why things like Mauna Kea are so important. That wasn't a movement that was able to galvanize as much support, especially within our own communities here in Hawaii, as Red Hill has. Yet there was a spill at Mauna Kea weeks ago. In July, at a UH facility, a telescope spilled gasoline into our aquifer. And so this is why things like Mauna Kea are so important. And so Red Hill becomes one of these moments in which we're able to create that solidarity between Kanaka Maoli, Kama'aina, the people of Hawaii, and then spread into the military itself so they can understand what our community has been facing for decades. We hope to build this movement greater together for them. And my heart goes out to those communities. And it is important to acknowledge that, our Kanaka community is integrated into the military. My grandfather served, my uncle has served, and many of our members that are Kanaka Maoli have uniforms on, and no small part because of a lack of economic opportunity. And so that is also the other side of the coin here, is us building economic power in solidarity. And so supporting not just made in Hawaii brands, but Native Hawaiian owned companies is one of the best ways in which we can build economic power that can help us build political power to one day regain as much of our land, if not all of it, as possible.
Thank you. Teddy, did you have a question that you wanted to ask?
I didn't have a question lined up, Jodie. I thought we were moving into the session on Earth Day. But if we're still in the Q&A session, then let's continue with that.
Just checking, I've asked Mary and Ruth to see if they could put in the chat what their questions are. And Taj?
I have a question. This question is for both Keone and Julian, and that is, where are the people on this? The people of Hawaii, the people of Guam. Is there a growing sentiment against all of this horrific militarization, or how do we shift the public opinion?
You want to go first, Julian?
Oh, sure. Okay. Yes, absolutely. There's a growing movement. I mean, to answer Medea's question from the chat, a growing movement for independence, as well as a growing sort of anti-war movement here. We have, in the last decade, I've seen such a dramatic expansion of sort of our activist movement. And we have like organizations whose sole purpose is opposing this current US military buildup. I'll just make a quick shout out to sort of the amazing grassroots indigenous Chamorro women who lead Pratehi Latexan, Save Virginia. This is a group that we work with very closely. We have protested at every single angle. And we've sort of, the thing that I'm proud about is that we've really done it in a diversified way. We've thrown everything that we could at it. The legal, non-legal, political, community, grassroots. I mean, we're invoking, for example, like even getting different members of the community that otherwise weren't really historically associated with activism. For example, the fisher folk. We have galvanized so many of our traditional fishermen. I'll just give you an example with the machine gun range that I talked about. It's created a weird surface danger zone whereby the US military is blocking access to all of our fishermen for no less than 242 days out of a 365-day year. Like no concern for the lunar calendar, no concern for how different species of fish, or anything, any traditional knowledge. So we have really galvanized certain communities that haven't been before. And so that really is expanding. And we are trying our absolute best. There are so many members in the community who are opposed to both this US military project and US militarization in general. Go ahead, Keone. Thank you.
Yeah, and then our movements are inherently linked globally and especially across the Pacific. In terms of support for defueling Red Hill, I would say we have more support for this movement than any that I've seen in my lifetime. I think when you talk about 8 elementary schools that have had their water source poisoned, in which the children there are told they cannot even wash their hands because there's jet fuel coming out of the faucet. This is one of those moments in which it does galvanize an incredible amount of support, both for civilians and members of the military, because it is the military that has been affected the most here in terms of the water coming out of their pipes. And so while we do have this support throughout Hawaii and Oahu in particular, still the Navy has refused to move a drop of oil out of the fuel facility itself. That is why a delegation went to Washington, D.C. It was within that short amount of time, making a lot of noise that, within that week, the task force was created that was given the Kuleana the responsibility to begin that defueling process. And we began to see a timeline that expands more than 2 years as repairs need to occur before fuel can begin to leave that facility. So we're still in a multi-year battle here, get fuel to leave the facility. And so we are trying to use this moment to shine a light on as many of these facilities that are leaking across Paeana, Hawaii as possible. So we do have the support in particular for this moment. We are beginning to face PR pressure, call to arms for, militarization, which is crazy to me to use occupied Hawaii and Guam to, supposedly support sovereignty for Taiwan from China. And so we're hoping within this moment that our struggles can rise as much as possible. And so even with so much support, we haven't seen actual progress in terms of getting that facility defueled. The other piece of that is we are beginning to hear rumors or statements in the public that they'd like to repurpose that facility. So for us, defueling is only stage 1, decommissioning is stage 2, and to me, deoccupation is stage 3. The military needs to leave that site. That site is sacred to us.
Thank you, Keone and Julian. Before we close the Q&A, perhaps, Stephen, you want to share with us your next steps, what you plan to do to advance the climate movement and the intersection or the melding of a variety of movements.
Thank you. I just want to say to Julian and all those who worked on that resolution of the UN, that's a big thing that people aren't paying enough attention to, in my opinion. Congratulations. I want to say that if the World Court rules or issues an advisory opinion on climate, it really could turbocharge a lot of litigation around climate around the world. And I think that's a really important step and a very clever thing that you guys organized. So I congratulate you. In terms of me personally, right now I'm writing a book and I'm listening to the title of Julian's book, and I'm thinking maybe we should have an offline conversation. You could recommend a title to me. I love the title of your book. That's amazing. It's beautiful. I'm writing a book and I'm doing a lot of speaking and I'm continuing to fight. I mean, Chevron tries to use me as a weapon of mass distraction so people don't pay attention to the crimes they committed against the indigenous peoples of the Amazon and Ecuador. So it's a little tricky because I need protection, but on the other hand, I can't be a distraction. So I just want to end my part of this by refocusing attention on the people down there who continue to suffer. Hundreds of people have died of cancer. No one knows the precise number because there's no one's going to fund a study to figure that out. But the people are really hurting, and they went to court, legitimately won a case, and Chevron simply refuses to pay and pays lawyers, millions and millions and millions of dollars to tie up the people they poison in litigation rather than, meeting its legal and moral responsibilities. So, it's the same story in Hawaii with the Pentagon, like we get that. It's the same story in Guam with the Pentagon. The fossil fuel industry and the military industrial complex are completely intertwined. We know that from war and from what's going on in Ukraine, and it's all connected. So we need to understand these connections and support each other and understand that what happens in Guam, what happens in Hawaii, what happens in Ecuador, what happens right here in Manhattan, where I've been completely screwed for 3 years by having my freedom taken away, is all part of the same picture they are painting to keep us down. I want to end by saying that they're not going to keep us down, okay? Hearing the stories of Red Hill and the stories of Guam and so many other stories, look, the history of Code Pink, what you guys have done with Code Pink, it's all inspirational. And the only reason they're doing all this stuff to us is because I believe because we're getting stronger and we're getting more effective and we're getting smarter in how we think about strategy and how we mobilize people to organize. So as we get more successful and as we grow, they're going to come up with strategies that are even more vicious. And we have to be prepared for that. And we have to stick together and understand we have the power of numbers and we can win these battles.
Thank you very much. Stephen Donziger, Julian Aguan, Keone DeFranco, it is such an honor to have you join us tonight as we kick off Earth Day. And right now, I'm going to ask everybody to unmute and thank our guests.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys.
Julian.
Thank you. You're wonderful people. You've done
Thank you.
Sorry
at the same
I will be supporting you as best I can.
needed to hear you and see you. Thank you.
Yes.
Wonderful speaker.
Thank you.
Great
Keep going.
Keep going is right.
All right, now with all that inspiration, let's hear from Teddy.
Yes,
What our next
war is
steps
not
are.
green.
Let's engage. Teddy, tell us what to do.
So having heard these incredible and also harrowing stories from Keone, from Julian, from Stephen, we have a responsibility to act, right? We've received some really marvelous education about the issues going on, and we need to act. And Earth Day is the time to do that, right? I think the phrase environmental justice sometimes can operate as a bit of a buzzword in the environmental movement, and we need to have it retain its power. Environmental justice means that we are facing down the interrelatedness of the climate crisis, the humanitarian crisis, the occupation and colonialization of island nations and places that the US is based around the globe. And as people of conscience, we need to be having the climate movement walk its talk on environmental justice. We need to make sure this word has actual meaning on Earth Day. And that's why we're asking everybody to join as partners for Earth Day. We have the War is Not Green campaign has an Earth Day hub, a site where you can visit for resources, for talking points, to find local events, and even to create local CODEPINK events. It's all very simple to do on that site. And it provides us all a platform to continue to echo the inspiration and the stories that we've heard here today. Maha, if we could go ahead and share that page, I'll put it in the chat also for everyone to have. And then we're gonna screen share. Amazing, it's coming up. There it is. So right front and center, we know that we cannot end climate change without ending war. And we also know that we cannot address the environmental injustices that we've just heard about without demilitarization, without cutting massively the funding that's going to the US Pentagon, redirecting that towards environmental and climate programs. So on April 22nd, we need to say yes to peace. Also the days leading up and the days following, and forever onwards, we need to say yes to peace for the environment. So this is the site. Everyone has the link now in the chat. Here's just a little blurb about why we're doing this. I won't read through all of it, but there's some of the rationale there, which is also related to the messages below. But I just want to echo, you know, some things that were mentioned on the call as well, like the Willow Project in Alaska, Cop City, which Stephen addressed. These are things that are all related to the war economy, the military-industrial complex. It could not be more interrelated. And as long as climate activists and peace activists continue their work without explicitly addressing and working at the interstices that are so present to us, we can't make progress in either movement. I think in many ways they're one and the same movement, and we need to make that clear to our co-organizers. So if you scroll on down, there's a button here that says Tell Biden End War to Save the Planet. I put that link in the chat. That's our petition. To do just that. I've discussed that already. Below that is a link, partner with us to bring Earth Day and war messaging to your actions. We ask that you please do that. That's a Google form. It'll allow you to give us your name and your email and your geographic location if you wish to partner and bring Earth Day and war messaging to your local Earth Day. What does that look like? It could look like creating a partnership with an organization that's already having an Earth Day event in your local town. It could look like being that organization. It could be as simple as flyering at your local Earth Day, choosing that day to flyer in a local park when people might be enjoying the spring weather. And we have resources to do so just below. If you scroll on down, get involved. So a couple great links there. On that bottom right, you can see it says print your own Earth Day posters and flyers. There's a link there to request those from our amazing support team. If you scroll on down from there, you can see events that we already have on the docket. Right there first is the very call that we're on, kicking off Earth Day. Amazing. It's officially kicked off. Following that, we have events in San Francisco, in New York City, in Boston, even London, that people can tap into. And we hope to see this list grow. Again, if you partner with us above, this list will continue to grow. All you have to do is send us some details and it will be an official CODEPINK event. I'm very excited, especially here in Brooklyn, for our CODEPINK War is Not Green event in New York. I'll be sharing a stage actually with Stephen at Rave Revolution, which will be happening on Friday in Manhattan. Right now the location is top secret, so we can pull this thing off. But if you register there, if you happen to be in New York, Stephen and I will be seeing you. It's a protest dance party. This is an amazing tactic brought forth by some activists that have come here just to organize this for Earth Day in New York. So we're thrilled about that. And there's a lot of other amazing tactics, marches, protests, flyering represented in these events as well. So I encourage everybody to use this site to take action, and again, to echo, to further the messages that we've just been shared here in this amazing call. You can also do that online. We're asking that everybody use the hashtags Earth Day 2023 and hashtag Earth Day End War so that we continue to make these links abundantly clear, as they need to be for the climate movement. I'm putting in the chat just sort of a sample tweet that folks might use for some messaging. There's lots of resources on the site to do this, but here's just a sample tweet that folks might use. You could remix this, make it a little bit more personal, use some of the things that you learned in this call around colonialization and occupation in Guam and Hawaii. And of course, everything that we've talked about with regards to Ukraine. So I just wanted to share all that with you all. We're really excited about Earth Day right around the corner, and we need to mobilize massively for peace and for planet. So thank you, everybody, and looking forward to Earth Day.
Thank you, Teddy. Thank you, Teddy. Thank you, Jodie. Thank you, Nancy, all of you who are working so hard on the War is Not Green campaign. So important. And these are fantastic resources. I hope everybody checks them out and shows up, you know, as you said, in a park, in a highly trafficked location. Bring your signs. War is not green. All right, at this point, we're going to conduct our Capitol calling party. I've got my phone right here. And if Maha, if you could put the little script in the chat. I hope that a lot of us have in our phone the phone numbers of our senators and our representatives, our congressional representative, so that we can call them directly. But tonight, our message is basically this. As we approach Earth Day, we are aware of the connection between militarism and climate, how the Pentagon is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Stop voting for war. Stop voting weapons for Ukraine. Push for a ceasefire. Stop voting weapons for Taiwan for another proxy war. We need peace, not war. We need to ensure that we are thwarting the climate crisis, not exacerbating it, not worsening it. And there it is, right in the chat. So Maha, if you don't mind putting on a little bit of John Douglas's terrific music, we can get started on making our call. So please join me in calling your representatives right now. Okay. Wrap up the calls. Thank you so much, Maha. We have 78 people still with us. You're making calls. Thank you so much for participating in this part of the show. And it's been a very inspiring and illuminating program. And again, I thank you all for coming. Please check out the many resources we have at the War is Not Green campaign on the CODEPINK website. Also, the Peace in Ukraine campaign under our resources page. We have a lot of great posters that you can also use if you decide to show up at an Earth Day event or call one of your own. Okay. So thank you so much. And if you want to save the chat, you've got the 3 dots at the bottom. And we will see you the first week in May, the first and third week in May. We'll continue with CODEPINK Congress. So thanks again. Take care. And so